Hey, welcome back to the Update Podcast, which is not 2.5 weeks late. It is not late whatsoever. Isn't that right, Usman?
Yep, of course not. And we are very happy to get back to you. We had some things going on and just getting the, nooks and crannies out of the way, but now we are
Yeah.
back to talk about more breaking news and more important topics going on around the world. So yeah,
Yeah.
let's get started.
Before we begin, I want to say thank you so much for, I think we're at 11 subscribers. 11 subscribers, which is a
Every
lot.
milestone counts.
Yeah, after one video, that's a lot of subscribers. Like
Mm-hmm.
after normally, like, what is it, like 10 videos, you get maybe 2 subscribers. So that's
Mm-hmm.
really good, especially it being like a 50-minute video. That's
Mm-hmm.
great. And I went to the YouTube analytics. I saw people actually like listen to that. So if you're one of the 3 people who actually listened all the way through to our podcast, thank you so much. I really did not expect anyone to do that. But thank you for doing that. Thank you for listening to us blabber on endlessly about random stuff.
But
Um,
yeah,
yeah. So we're gonna talk. We're gonna continue talking about what's happened, has been happening, it happened, is happening, and is continuing to happen to Palestine. Where did we leave off last? We left off right before the ceasefire was
right
announced,
before the
right?
ceasefire, yeah.
Right. So yeah, I'm sure most people have heard a ceasefire has been declared, so people are no longer being shot at, which
Mm-hmm.
is obviously a good thing, but that is not the end goal. In fact, that
Yeah.
is now we're just back to
It's
what was
it's
happening for the past 70 years. Like that's
yeah.
not we're it's like, subtracting one and then 2 weeks later you add one again. That's not you're if you're still at minus 100, you're still not any better than you were before.
I felt like it was almost like I don't want to, I want to use a metaphor for this. It was like the Israel supporters trying using they used it as a pacifier for the protests and the movements, and
Mm,
a lot of people actually were pacified by it, and that's the sad thing because a lot
yeah.
of the people that are on this borderline of I support these human rights and I know what's happening because I have social media. They see what's going on, but then they see the ceasefire, and then they are like they close their phones and they're
Yeah, they
like
think all is
all is good.
resolved. All is
Exactly.
fine. Yeah.
And that's the issue with certain headlines and certain these things that get passed because in this world most of the time things are not followed through with,
Oh,
people
no,
don't follow
of
the
course
rules.
not.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the
Um
scary thing.
so yeah, there is no longer a ceasefire. I mean, sorry, there is a ceasefire. People are no
Hmm.
longer like being shot at, but we're going to talk about the problems that were happening before any of this more recent events had picked up, right?
Yeah.
So to start off, in Palestine, in places like Gaza and in the West Bank, people were
Hmm.
pretty people like Palestinians. They're pretty much restricted from so many different things. Like for example, an Israeli citizen, they can pretty much do whatever they want, live wherever they want. They have
Hmm.
citizenship. They have clean water,
Hmm.
electricity. All sorts of normal things.
Yep.
And a majority of Palestinians, especially like, have you seen the statistics of people living in Gaza? They have like, what is it, like 95% of the water is undrinkable
they
and
they
four
are
hours of electricity per day.
second class citizens, and it's
Yeah,
so sad.
no, and they also, up until very recently, they could not
Hmm.
leave because, in case you don't know, Gaza has 3 borders: one with Israel, one with
Hmm.
the ocean, one with the Mediterranean, and one with Egypt. They were all blocked off, so they couldn't go anywhere. So it's
Yep. And
it's
Egypt was also a very oppressive
yeah.
nation too, so
Now
just
I
keep
think
that in
that's
mind.
the border that is opened up now, I
Yep.
believe, but there's still issues. I'm sure there's more to talk about between Egypt and how
And there's
they're
just
playing the
so much
situation, but
police and soldier
oh yeah.
oppression and occupation by Israel.
Yeah, like in
Um,
case you don't know, all throughout parts of Palestine there are fences and, like, the huge wall that borders within Palestine that is technically between, quotation marks, between Israel and Palestine, but in reality it's in
yeah.
Palestine. That gigantic wall that was probably like Trump dreamed about in 2016. That
Yeah.
is what they had that have, excuse me, have in the air in Palestine, where is that Israel has built, restricting the where people can go, and they have fences and military checkpoints. Oh,
Yeah.
by the way, that wall, according to the United Nations International Court of Justice, is completely 100% illegal.
Exactly. that's the thing. So a lot of these things are overlooked. A lot of these things, when you just they just get away with it, and that's the real sad reality of the
I feel like
situation.
people don't truly realize. Like, I feel like now people have become numb to a lot of the numbers and things they hear in the news. Yeah,
Desensitization, right?
desensitized. Exactly. They hear like,
Yeah.
oh, this many people died. People hear that so often they've become
I
desensitized to
I
it.
even I even feel like I'm a victim of that. Like, not even a
Oh,
victim.
I,
Like,
I
I'm
feel like it's
susceptible to it.
impossible, especially if you live in the West. I feel like it's impossible, no matter how hard you try, to
Yep.
not have that, at least some amount of that effect happen to you.
And I would say that the main people that we should be angry about for that is the politicians around the world in power, you
That
know?
is very true.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, I completely lost my train of thought.
We were talking about how the wall
Oh
was
yeah,
absolutely
yeah,
illegal. Yeah.
yeah. There you go. The wall, right? People don't realize how bad stuff like that is until it's happening to them, and we'll never really know how that is because we're obviously
Exactly.
not in Palestine. But
Exactly. Yeah.
it would it's unimaginable to have, like, border restrictions of like, hey, you can send your children to school but you can't guarantee that the border will be open when
Yeah.
school's closed. It's like, what,
It was
like, just
a
restriction
perfect
of what you can do.
a perfect example of it is, well, not just the fact that this has like effects on like whole neighborhoods and stuff, but also the
Hmm.
fact that more like families, like they're growing up and kids are growing up, and since this there's no like resolution to this issue, these
Yeah.
kids are growing up and this is becoming their daily lives, and
Oh yeah.
they're not understanding that there's a world that there's like this is not what peace should be. This is not what like
No, this is
a normal
not.
neighborhood should be. They see rockets flying up in the air, and that's
Yeah.
a normal day for them. When they don't see it, that's a relief for them. Like, the fact that it's like they have to be used to this type of stuff, it's just beyond like it's
That's
beyond
horrible. Like the idea that children
humane.
have
Yeah.
to grow up in that environment and they think that it's normal because unfortunately they are in a position where that is just happening around them. That's so horrible,
Yeah,
and people have just become desensitized to that.
exactly. It's very sad.
I
But
always think about it like this. It's like, how, just to sort of put as a reference, imagine if the politicians who do everything they can to stop, just for example, immigrants and stuff getting the help they need and who are trying to seek out a better life for their families. Imagine if the politicians and the immigrants were swapped places, right? Do you think that those
exactly.
politicians would still have the same opinion that they would?
Yep.
Of course they wouldn't, right? They would want all the
Exactly.
help that they can possibly get. People make decisions about stuff or have opinions about stuff relative to their position. If something isn't directly affecting them, they're gonna be more lazy about it. Does that make sense? People
I
aren't
think
gonna
this
care
is a
as much.
I think this is a very common theme throughout the history of civilization, I would
Yeah,
say, in my opinion.
yeah,
History of any nation and empire and stuff like that.
hmm,
These people in power, they will do what benefits them.
yeah.
And as it has been getting better in the past couple hundred
Oh
years.
yeah, there are good
However,
politicians out there. Let's clarify that. Not every
yeah,
politician is bad, just a lot of them.
yeah, exactly. It's just not enough, and
It's not enough. Yeah.
that's why we need this power of movements and protests, which is a whole other issue that we should definitely touch on.
Yeah. Um. Yeah, so anyway, illegal walls, restrictions of where Palestinians can go, whether they can go home to their own homes at the end of the
Apartheid
day. Yeah.
and settler colonialism.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah. Um let's talk about that actually a little bit. How this
Yeah.
actually all started. So, the this issue, right? This
Mhm.
horrible atrocity that has happened that is
Mhm.
happening in Palestine. This did not start thousands of years ago, like a lot of people
Mhm.
apparently believe. This started 73 years ago, I believe, within the
Around
last,
that time, yeah.
under 75 years ago. Um, and this all started with, do you want to guess who? Take a guess.
England, yep.
Yep, the British.
Yeah.
Uh, Using their classic foreign policy, as always, divide and
Mhm.
conquer,
Mhm.
which is exactly what happened. At least their 1900s foreign policy, divide and conquer. Because before, by the way, Muslims, Jews, and Christians all lived in the area
Yeah.
of Israel and Palestine, like, peacefully.
Yep.
Excuse me. They all lived peacefully until the British showed up and said, "Hey, you are all ours now."
Yeah.
So
They
the
they
yeah,
didn't just divide borders. They
No,
it,
they
it, be-
set
it
things up in a way to where people would sort of become upset with each other and become hostile towards each other. And
based
that's how
on
division happened.
based on religious basis and
Yeah,
racial, like, basis.
yeah.
But the main thing is that they were coexisting prior to the British intervention,
Yeah.
which is really key, and
Mm-hmm.
that's a very big issue, and a lot of people will forget that and
Oh,
not
of course.
include that in history, and like when they're talking about these things.
Mm-hmm.
And also the US's presence and the United Nations presence is
Yeah.
very important, to understand what's the root cause of these things, and then that's how you can look back at it and try to solve things based on that,
Mm-hmm. By the way, 75 years ago, this was not like the early 1900s. This is the
hmm
1950s. This is after World War II. This is like,
yep.
this is the same era as jet fighters. And, this is
Yeah,
not the era of steam trains and like,
it's more
pickaxes.
modern than people will remember.
Yeah,
Like
it's a very
people will think
modern
of it.
era. Like our
One thing,
grandparents
yeah,
lived through this time period. Like it's not
exactly.
very long ago.
People will look at pictures and see, oh, it's black and white. Must have been a long time
Black
ago.
and white does not mean old.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I keep losing my train of thought today. I don't know
But
what's
yeah, let's
happening.
talk about like how
Oh
that
yeah,
resulted in
history.
settler colonialism.
So
Yeah.
anyway, yeah, that happened. But over time, I'm not exactly sure when, but over time, the British realized that they can't really keep a hold of their colony, if that's the right
And
word.
they were losing power in general.
Yeah, they were
so,
losing
yeah.
power in general. Oh, by the way, really quick, I don't want this to sound like we're just hating on British people. That's not what this is in any way. It's not. It's not that at all. This is not like some all British people are horrible. This is not that at all. It's just the policies that were used. They're not current. They're not used anymore. The things
Yeah.
that did happen were wrong, and the policies that were used were wrong. But I'm sure even British, obviously, British people would say, yeah, what happened was wrong. Nobody's gonna dispute that, right?
Yeah. Yep.
All right. Anyway, yeah, that was
Definitely
wrong.
need just to clear that up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The British decided, hey, this isn't good. So instead of necessarily dealing with the problem, they went to the newly formed United Nations. Hey, United Nations, welcome to the world. Welcome to existing. Here's your first challenge. Plopped it on their desk and ran away.
Yeah.
And so now
And
it's in the United. Then it was in the
and
United Nations' hands.
who was the main leader of the United Nations? You guessed it, the United States.
Oh yeah, the good old United States of America. We have no problems here. We're the perfect nation. We had no
Exactly.
problems. It's not like there was rampant racism and people of certain colors couldn't vote in this time period.
Yeah.
It's not like that was a thing at
Exactly.
all.
Exactly.
God. I feel like
They
people forget
spread.
that too, right? Just
I
not
know.
how like literally in history class we're learning about this, and it was like giving me a refresher about it. It's like not that long ago people could not do certain things simply because of their ethnicity or their race. Isn't that
And
crazy?
I would say the scarier thing is that that same intimidation factor and that same racism still persists to this day.
Oh yeah, for sure.
It's just not
People may
part
have
of
the
the
same like
legislation.
rights according to, the laws and stuff, but it's still
Yeah,
people are still very obviously discriminated
most definitely.
because
Yeah,
of discriminated towards because of their race.
most
It's not
definitely.
like
Yeah,
it's not like that problem is gone today. If anything, the problem is
and
still here today, but just in a
exactly.
different form.
But yeah, so that this country, the U.S., had
Yeah.
their own civil rights issues, right?
Yeah, of
But
course.
then
And now we
they
decide, hey, let's deal with this problem.
let's go
What could go wrong?
spread our segregation over to other countries in the
Yeah.
Middle East,
And
and so
so,
they do it.
yeah,
They
and over
fund
time, this just
into Israel.
it evolved into what's happened now. People are fighting. There's, oppression. There's genocide. That is the correct
Yeah, let's
word,
make
right?
sure. Oh, yeah, it's the genocide. But the main thing that you have to note here is that it wasn't the Jews that were doing it. It was
No,
the
no, no, no.
Zionists,
Yeah.
and the Zionists were funded,
Yeah,
and they were able to create their own military,
Yeah.
create their own nation,
yeah.
and then they took that identity of Judaism, and that's
Mhm.
one thing I don't like is that we should be everyone should be very respectful towards Judaism and Jews and that
Oh yeah.
religion because
Can we talk about that really quick? Because this is
yeah,
something that I'm seeing so much. I am seeing pro Zionist and pro Israel people saying using the defense that all people who are
anti-Semitism.
saying free Palestine are anti-Semitic. That is the
Exactly.
worst. That
Such a
is
baseless
so.
claim.
That is a baseless claim, and I'm gonna debunk it right now. All right.
Let's do
Let
it.
me explain something. Anti-Semitism is not anti-Zionism. Those are two very different things.
Exactly.
And all Jewish people are not the Israeli state. Jewish people are not the Israeli state. Let me say that one more time.
Exactly.
Jewish people does not equal the Israeli state. All right.
Let's hope people understand
Yeah.
that now.
Zionism, as it has been practiced, was only possible because of ethnic cleansing, right?
Yep.
Opposing Zionism for this reason is taking a stand against oppression and colonialism. We can all agree on that,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
The legitimate, let me, I messed it up. The legitimate critiques of Israel do not encourage anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
We can all
That's
agree
true.
on that.
Exactly.
have-
You're judging that nation and its borders. You're not judging a religion or even people, really.
And let me make a big point about this. There are genuine, sadly, there are genuine people who are actually anti-Semitic and hate Jewish people because they are Jewish. They are awful people, and a picture of them comes up when you Google "scum of the earth."
Yeah, exactly.
Like, they are
It's the
awful
same
people.
same thing with being racist. Like
Yeah,
it's like that's a whole other issue. But then when people try to associate that and try, it's a prime example of scapegoating.
yeah,
And
exactly.
who does the scapegoating? The people, the people that are doing the bad thing, right? Like,
Yeah,
as in this case,
absolutely.
it would be Israel. The people that were caught red-handed, in this case Israel, right?
Yeah,
The Zionists are going to use this as a scapegoat.
yeah.
And they're oftentimes getting away with it nowadays.
Oh, I know, because
Scary thing.
people literally could Google like basic Wikipedia definitions of words, and they could
Yeah,
put the pieces together that, hey, they're fighting for the freedom of Palestine from oppression. They're not hating on Jewish people.
yeah,
Because that,
exactly.
yeah, but people are just so caught up into people saying that, oh, all people who say free Palestine, they're anti-Semitic. That's not true. That's not true.
Yep.
People saying free Palestine, they are not anti-Semitic. They're the people who are actually anti-Semitic. They are horrible people. They only harm every cause. They harm
Exactly.
everything, and they are horrible, horrible people. With that
Let's
being
also
said, we
remember
are
that.
not anti-Semitic.
Yeah.
People saying free Palestine are not anti-Semitic. They want freedom of Palestine from the oppression of Israel.
Let's also remember that Semitic is actually a group of people that are like in the Jerusalem area, and who also lives in that Jerusalem area. Palestinians too.
Yeah.
So they are. It's like that area, that is like a Semitic area of people, right? So when people are talking about anti-Semitism, that also means that people that oppose Palestinians too. How would it make any sense for Palestinians themselves to be anti-Semitic? It's
that really wouldn't make sense.
This whole claim is baseless of anti-Zionism
It absolutely
equals
is.
anti-Semitism. So yeah, we just debunked that. So
have you actually legitimately, hypothetically, right? Let's say you saw posts. Well, you have. I know. I'm pretty sure you have, right? You've seen posts claiming that people who say free Palestine are anti-Semitic. Have you seen a single post that actually gave any sort of proof or pictures or any sort of evidence
evidence?
Yeah, actual solid evidence that people saying free Palestine were also saying kill Jewish people or something like that. Because obviously not.
What I saw was empty words from celebrities put under pressure, and those that were blackmailed. Yeah. And a prime example of that was, can I bring this up?
Yeah, sure, go for it.
Mark Ruffalo.
I was gonna talk about that. Yes,
exactly. Ruffalo.
I feel like people are incredibly angry at him for what, I don't want to say what he did. I want to say what he was most likely forced to do.
Yeah.
Right, because he, in case you don't know, Mark Ruffalo played and plays the Hulk in the Avengers movies. He is definitely under like a Disney movie contract, and I'm sure somewhere in that 5,000-page contract it says somewhere that, hey, if it pretty much just says between the lines or something like that hey, if Disney doesn't like what you're saying on Twitter, then Mickey Mouse can come in and take your phone and delete everything, and so we can say whatever we want. Yeah, or else Mickey Mouse is gonna be very angry. Like I'm sure somewhere there it says that. Because
Yeah.
do you know? Did you see his tweets that he made about Palestine and Israel before?
I saw a very big disparity and very big difference between before the pressure and after the pressure. You could
Oh yeah,
very easily and distinctly tell which ones were before and after.
oh yeah.
Um,
Because
and
before that, here I actually have one of his quote tweets right here. Ready? This
and
is
I
before
exactly.
I'm assuming Disney told him to, hey, delete all your tweets and stop
Yeah.
talking about this and move on.
Yeah.
Right? I'm gonna quote one of his tweets right here from Mark Ruffalo on Twitter.
Hmm.
1,500 Palestinians face expulsion in Jerusalem. 200 protesters have been injured. 9 children have been killed. Sanctions on South Africa helped free its black people. It's time for sanctions on Israel to free Palestinians. Join the call.
I saw that, and that was a pretty empowering
That
tweet.
is
And
incredibly empowering
I
tweet.
was definitely proud to be someone that was like someone that supported like an actor like this. And
Oh
then
yeah.
later on, I saw his pressured tweet, his
Oh
tweet that
yeah.
he probably was not threatened into, but
Not
pressured
threatened,
into.
but here's the thing, right? I'm sure that if he continued to make tweets about that, which probably was definitely the right thing to do, if he had done
Hmm.
that, I feel like he would have been fired from Disney, which is a lot for someone like Mark Ruffalo. That's obviously a lot,
Yep.
and I'm
Can we bring in
sure.
another celebrity
Oh
too?
yeah, sure, go ahead.
I think it was Bella Hadid. You know?
I've heard that name. I'm not actually sure
Yeah.
who that is. Let me look.
So she's like just a model or influencer or whatever, and she was supporting Palestine like very not like very like actively, but she was for a celebrity, a
Mm-hmm.
celebrity to take a stance on this
Mm-hmm.
in support of Palestine is a big deal because
Mm-hmm.
we live in the U.S., one the biggest ally of Israel. So
Mm-hmm.
she because of her her background and just she is definitely an activist. She
Mm-hmm.
supported Palestine on her Instagram story. She went to
Mm-hmm.
protests and
Oh
she
wow.
spread that all over social media. She did that right
Right.
proudly, and then
Mm-hmm.
we saw her not only was she starting to get pressured into that, and she started to say, "I respect Israel." She said that, right? And
Wow.
then people, yeah,
I
she
was not
was,
aware of
and
that.
a lot of people were said that she was forced into it. But
Mm-hmm.
not only that, but another big deal was that she lost a lot of partnerships and sponsorships with
Whew.
former companies, that she was with. And I
Mm.
mean, she's already rich and all that, but like it's
No,
not gonna
yeah.
be like the end of the world for her. But that's a big deal because compare that to someone like the actor for Wonder Woman, Gal Gadot, or
Oh yeah.
I don't know how to pronounce it. She actively and proudly supported Israel, and
Yeah.
very much more so than how Bella Hadid talked about Palestine.
Yeah.
And Gal Gadot kept and upheld all of her sponsorships with the companies.
Yeah.
Look at the difference between those two
Oh yeah,
models.
no, for sure. It's crazy just how much companies that you would normally think are silent on issues have an opinion on stuff like this and how much they do in response to people
Exactly,
literally making tweets.
exactly.
It would
It
not
just goes
surprise
to
me. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
show how big of an ally the U.S. really is with Israel.
Yeah.
That's what I think from this.
It would not surprise me if one day, like when just for example, Mark Ruffalo decides that hey, I'm gonna step down from being the Hulk and he ends his Disney contract. It would not surprise me if one day he like says somewhere that yeah, what happened in 2021 during that incident between Palestine and Israel, all the
Yeah.
tweets that I made. Those were my own, but then what happened when I had to delete them was Disney came in and said, hey, stop doing that or else you'll be fired. It would not surprise me if one day, like a few years from now, that happens.
One thing I wanted to talk about, or one thing I want to say is, although we always will talk about and criticize the politicians around this world
Mm-hmm.
because they fail and they do corrupt things in
Mm-hmm.
many instances,
Yeah.
we also have to look at these billion, close to not yeah, $100 billion companies that
Yeah.
dominate the world industry, and not just that,
Mm-hmm.
they influence every aspect of people's lives, and they can determine whether these Palestinians are going to live to see another day
Yeah.
because just based on certain things like controlling protests and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So a whole other thing that started in terms of Palestine was, did you hear about the BDS movement?
The what? Sorry.
it's the BDS movement for Palestine. It's
I
like boycott, I think I'm pronouncing it divestment. I don't know how to pronounce it. And sanctions.
mhm.
People are trying to boycott Israeli products,
Oh, I am
and
familiar with that. Sorry, yeah, I
it had
wasn't
been
familiar with the acronym.
yeah, it's not super popular like
Yeah.
on social media, but
Hmm.
basically boycotting Israeli products in order to try to cut their funds and possibly
Okay, yeah.
make a impact, you know.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I was very interested in that. Maybe that's maybe that's a path that people could take to try to
Yeah.
have an impact on this, because these companies have so much power right now
Oh, companies
in
have
this war.
insane amount of power. Could you imagine all the
Exactly.
lives that would be alive right now if companies, every time there was some sort of like atrocity happening somewhere,
Hmm.
they stepped in and said, "Hey, stop doing that, or else we're gonna stop doing stuff in your country." Could you imagine how many people would be
Exactly.
alive if they did that? Like, not even
If
take any action, just say some things.
I would say the main issue is that we put our like the power is those like CEOs at the top, and those people at the head of
Hmm.
these companies. They have all that power, and what if they're not good people?
Oh
Then
yeah,
people
no,
like this suffer. They're gonna
yeah.
suffer. It's a sad thing.
um,
But
I
yeah,
don't want to keep talking. I want to have a little bit of a break between all of the sadness and the unfortunateness. So we're going to talk about some a little bit not necessarily good news, but better news, if that makes
yeah,
sense. Um, you're
it's always
yeah,
important.
obviously about in this situation, right?
Yeah,
There are unfortunate things that have happened. People have died. So many people have been arrested. Like the amount of people that have been arrested, I think it's like 1,500. Don't quote me on that, but
wow,
like hundreds and hundreds of people have been arrested.
yeah,
It's all very unfortunate,
yeah,
but at least now we know, at least now we're hearing about these things, right? Like no matter what, in some form or another, no matter how much any government tries to crack down on that,
yep.
people always end up finding out one way or
I
another.
absolutely agree. And I would say we touched on this in the last episode. The
Hmm.
power of social media is
Yeah.
very strong.
Hmm.
And I can say that firsthand because social media dictates a lot of my life as an American teenager.
Yeah.
However, what I'm trying to get at with this is there's people on these apps that are saying never stop talking about Palestine until it is
Yeah.
free. And that just like it literally gives me hope as
Yeah.
like a human in this like in this world right now, because we see what's going on, and seeing people
Hmm.
have this mindset, and people develop this mindset because of the social media that exposed what was going on there.
Hmm.
That just knowing that can happen,
Hmm.
it's like it gives us hope, I would say,
Yeah.
right, Amar?
Could you imagine like being someone who like imagine being a child growing up in
Yeah,
Palestine and thinking that there's no one on your side. Every person in the world hates you.
that's probably what it feels like, and that's so
Everything is
sad.
just awful and horrible. The only good thing is that one day you see like pictures from social media somehow
Hmm.
and that there are people actually supporting you. Could you imagine the hope that that would give you
Yeah, it's a little hope, but I can't even imagine because
versus
of the
seeing all the
atrocities they
propaganda
face.
news that people normally see?
Yeah, exactly. It's like the power of social media. It's like it's very strong. It's a common
Hmm.
theme, and we're definitely seeing that, and it's affecting, it's sparking these protests that we're seeing,
Yeah.
and protests. People will say like they're peaceful. So what could they possibly do?
Hmm.
They may have a big impact when
They
you
have an
see
incredibly large impact.
yeah, when you see hundreds of thousands of people
Did you
gathered in
see?
London,
Sorry, yeah. Did you see a few weeks ago there were like 20,000 people in Chicago, as in Chicago, the United States,
yeah,
gathered?
I
That's
think I
all
might have heard about
coordinated
that.
through
Yeah,
social media, right? Like I'm sure a
yeah,
majority of the people found out about protests in their area because of social media, right? Like
social
obviously, I
media.
can't remember the last time I saw CNN or someone saying, "Hey, there's a peaceful protest going on." They probably said something like, "Hey, there's a riot going on." Something like
Yeah,
that.
exactly. They're gonna post about it in their
They're gonna
certain
depict it
lens.
as in a certain way that makes
Exactly.
yeah. Um,
We know that.
yeah. With that being said, there are still issues. Social media is not a perfect place. It does do a lot of
Yeah.
good, but there is still a lot of issues with it. And one major thing, especially that I realized how big of a almost problem it
Yep.
is the concept of things being in trend versus not being in trend anymore.
Ooh. Yep.
I
I
feel
agree.
like there were so many people just like almost it felt like just a few days ago that were posting about Palestine. You know,
Yeah.
everyone in the world was talking about Palestine. Now I feel like that's starting to die
It was
down a bit.
trend. You brought in trends, and
Yeah,
literally
trends.
think about it. Trending on Twitter, you know, the top 10 thing.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Palestine was there,
Yeah, it
and that's
was.
like
It was there.
that was the peak of it, and that was like this is hope. This is where change is gonna
Yeah,
occur,
it's
and then
finally happening.
you slowly see it going off that chart, and
Yeah,
you're like, dang it, why are people turning a blind eye
yeah.
to this genocide again?
And
You
to
know?
be honest, that makes me really upset. Is that people are seeing like children literally dying, and
Yep,
seeing that as nothing more than like another weekly trend. Like that's such a horrible mentality.
exactly. And
Like that really shouldn't be a thing.
we saw this with the BLM movement. It
Yeah,
was it would peak at certain
it
times,
would.
and then people would just go on with their day and go on with their lives
Yeah,
and start a new trend. You know?
yeah. Which is
How?
definitely a
Yeah,
negative of social media, but at least in all fairness, we can't really critique that because it, without social media there would be really no change whatsoever. At least there's
I agree.
something. In fact, to be honest, I feel like if social media wasn't covering what happened and has happened in and is happening in
Yep,
Palestine, there would not be a ceasefire still, and the
that's
situation would
true.
be much
I
worse if that hadn't happened.
And on an individual level, for like both of us,
Yeah.
without social media, we would not be having this topic as or sorry, yeah, this Palestine as the topic of our podcast
Oh
today.
yeah, for sure.
Think about that,
if
right?
if social media wasn't covering this, we would only have the information from news sources which have a bias despite what they may say, and we would probably believe that the people in Palestine are horrible people and all they want to do is kill other people, which is not
Yep,
true. But that's what people are believing, or at least some people are believing, because that's how the news depicts it.
exactly. Social media it's like it's there's pros and cons to it, just like
There
there
are, for
is with
sure.
every media source,
Oh,
right?
absolutely.
Yeah,
But I would say, at least right now, the pros of social media have outweighed the cons simply because everything else that you can compare social media to, news sources, politicians, famous people on Twitter,
yeah.
everything else just has cons. At least social media has a few pros to it.
I would say that's true, and
Yeah,
I would say the main difference between it is social media gives you that voice,
yeah.
even when you're just
It has an
when you like
unfiltered voice. Like
unfiltered voice. Yeah,
no one can
you don't
suppress it. No one can
you
stop
don't have
people
to
from saying
have
certain things.
yeah you don't have to have a huge identity to share certain facts, to
Yeah,
share a certain video that could
yeah.
change the world. You know,
Mm-hmm.
you can just spread it with just like 0 followers,
Yeah.
and you can make a huge impact and change the whole outcome and situation of a certain conflict. You know,
Yeah.
that's crazy. That's something that we've
Like
never seen
think
before.
of all of like the protests and stuff that were able to happen and the change that the protests were able to make, right? Like, because
Exactly.
peaceful protests, they have a huge effect, right?
We've seen that throughout history.
Yeah,
Yeah.
throughout history we have seen peaceful protests. Like, think of
Mr.
some
Gandhi
famous
himself started
protests. Yeah,
Gandhi.
and just some other. What are some other ones? Oh,
MLK.
Martin Luther King's "I Have a Dream" speech.
Exactly. Yeah.
That his peaceful protest. That was
Founded on
insane.
peaceful protest.
Yeah.
Sometimes peaceful protests are even stronger and more impactful than violent protests.
Oh yeah, I would say
Yeah.
violent protests are a negative for sure.
Just because they create
Yeah,
they paint those the protesters as the oppressor,
yeah.
and that's the issue.
Which is ironic because you can go look at statistics. I'll even link them in the description.
Yeah,
It was like pretty much proven from like body camera footage and news footage and all sorts of stuff that a majority of protests from like for like George Floyd protests during the
yeah,
summer, a majority of the protests, like 70% of the protests, started and ended completely peacefully, and
exactly. Yeah,
the 30% that were that turned into riots, like
yep.
25% of that became non-peaceful protests because of provocative action by police.
Police.
Yeah,
And we see the same thing in Israel and
But nobody
Palestine.
wants to talk about that. It's like, hey, it turned into a riot. Who started the riot? No, no, don't look at that. Just
It's
know that it
always the
happened.
perspective, man. It's always the perspective.
People only see what they want to see, and they don't look at everything. Even if they, especially once they realize that they're in the wrong, they will do everything they can to blindfold themselves to the things
Yeah,
that put them in the wrong, and only look at
exactly.
things that put them in the right.
Exactly. Absolutely. And those are, and often the sad thing is, often those people that do that, a lot of them are politicians. They are
Oh yeah,
making our
absolutely. In fact,
legislation, they're making our
with
policy.
politicians, it's even worse because not only are they trying to mask themselves from seeing that, in fact, they probably aren't. Their only goal is to try and mask their followers and their supporters from seeing the things that put them in the wrong, right? Because
Absolutely.
obviously, as a politician, they don't want to be seen in the wrong. They want to be seen in the right.
Yep.
So they're going to do everything they can to make sure that they're only seen in the right.
Their image. Yeah.
Yeah, which I find
It's
just
absolutely sad.
yeah. Um, we're pretty much out of time, but I don't want this to end on a sad note. So
Yeah.
next week, well, I'm not gonna say next week. Whenever we have another episode,
Yeah.
we are going to um we are going to do an update on Palestine if there is anything else to talk about. I'm sure there will be more. No matter what, we will
Yeah.
talk about this a little
Let's
bit.
hope for a resolution. Yeah.
But I'm sure you're aware the tragic killing of George Floyd, the 1 year anniversary that recently passed.
Yeah.
So we're going to be talking about the Black Lives Matter movement and how that's just a sort of a recap of what happened and how that has happened, is still happening a little bit. We're going to talk about that next week. Do a summary of that. We're going to talk about protests. We're going to talk a lot about Portland because that was a big, like, Portland was all around the news like around a year ago because of the
Yeah.
protests that were happening here.
It's always good to reflect on those things. Yeah.
Especially now that we're pretty much a year after that. It's
Yeah.
really good to reflect on what's pretty much, I don't want to say a closed book, but we're going to say a complete chapter. And the story
Yeah.
is still being told, but at least a chapter of it has been completed.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk about that next week. It'll be great. Not next week. Next time we record. Hopefully next week.
Yes. We are excited to talk more.
Yeah. If you want to look at any of the articles that we got our information from, that'll be in the description. Thank you so much for listening. If you got all the way through this, thank you so much.
We really appreciate you guys
do.
listening in.
Yeah, it really makes us happy to like actually know there are people listening.
Yeah.
Which is crazy. What else was I gonna say? Oh yeah.
Make sure we are not those YouTubers that beg for likes, beg for subscribers, but we do love when our voices and it's mainly our voices about facts and situations around the world can be amplified because we just want to spread the truth. So please, if you could, like, subscribe, do
we
whatever
really
you
appreciate
could.
that. Especially on a small channel like ours, every single subscriber like puts you in another tier of YouTube's algorithm pushing your videos out to more people. So we would really appreciate, you don't have to, but we would appreciate if you did subscribe and like the video. That would be really, really great.
And what we appreciate just as much is learn something from what we talked about, the same way we learn we learn from what we see on social media.
Yeah.
That's always important too,
If you don't take away anything else from this, just take away that you should look for yourself instead of just trusting what someone says, because
definitely don't blindly follow.
Yeah.
Always search for the truth.
Search for the truth and make sure that there's evidence,
That's exactly. That's the motto that we're gonna follow in this channel, and we're just gonna follow that with every topic. You know?
That can be our like quote, right? Words are hollow without evidence, something like that.
Exactly. Yeah. But
thank you for listening.
We look forward to our next episode with you guys. Yeah. So yeah.
I'm Amar.
And I'm Osman. We'll catch you guys later.
And thank you for listening to The Update.